I never imagined my life could unravel in a single evening. 17 years of marriage. Gone in an instant. It started with a simple conversation. Or at least, that's what I thought it was. My wife, Emily, had been quiet all day. The kind of quiet that makes you uneasy, like when you know something is brewing just under the surface. She sat across from me at the dining table, her hands folded tightly, her wedding ring glinting under the dim light. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Those 6 words felt like the edge of a blade pressing into my chest. Her eyes welled up as she spoke. "I've been seeing someone. For years." The words echoed in my head, but their meaning didn't sink in at first. "What? What are you talking about?" I stammered. Her confession came out in fragmented sentences. "A coworker. 4 years. It ended only because he died." I didn't know what hit me harder, the affair itself or the fact that it only ended because of his death. The man had suffered a heart attack, and suddenly she was left to face the reality of her actions. Emily sobbed, but it didn't feel real. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was something deeper, but as she cried, all I could think about was how easily she had shattered everything we'd built. That night, she left. Packed a bag, said she needed space to think, and walked out the door, leaving me with 3 confused daughters and a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush me. For days, I replayed her words in my head, trying to make sense of it all. Had I missed the signs? Was I a fool for thinking we had a happy marriage? The house felt like a stranger's. Her empty side of the bed, the untouched coffee cup on the counter, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hall, it all mocked me. I couldn't focus on anything but the question that haunted me. Why? My daughters, 15, 13, and 11, asked where their mom went. I didn't have an answer. "She needs some time," I told them, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. How do you explain betrayal to your children without breaking them? The truth was, I didn't have any answers. Not for them, not for myself. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, and I was left standing in the wreckage. The days after Emily left were a blur. Each hour felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her betrayal grew stronger with every passing moment. The more I thought about it, the more cracks I noticed in what I had believed was a solid marriage. The realization gnawed at me. This wasn't just a single moment of weakness, it was a calculated deception that had lasted for years. I remembered the late nights when she claimed she was working overtime. The business trips that seemed oddly timed and the vague excuses she gave when I asked about them. I had chalked it all up to the demands of her job. I had trusted her completely. Now, those memories felt like a cruel joke. Her confession about boredom stung the most. We had built a life together, a family, a home, years of shared moments, and it wasn't enough for her. She had risked everything for what? A fleeting thrill? It made me question everything about myself, about us. Was I that inadequate as a husband? Had she been unhappy all these years, and I was too blind to see it? The silence of the house didn't help. The laughter of my daughters, usually so comforting, now felt bittersweet. They didn't know the truth yet. How could I tell them that their mother, the woman who had baked cookies for school events and helped them with their homework, had betrayed us all? My thoughts became consumed by her lies. Every smile she had given me over the past 4 years felt false. Every hug, every kiss, every time she told me she loved me, it all seemed tainted now. I replayed the details she shared, trying to piece together the timeline of her affair. Her coworker. I didn't even know his name, but I hated him. Not just for what he had done, but for how easily he had stepped into my life without me noticing. He had shared moments with her that should have belonged to me. That knowledge burned in a way I couldn't describe. I tried to focus on the practical things, getting the kids to school, paying bills, making meals. But even those simple tasks felt insurmountable. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her. The way she folded towels in the linen closet. The perfume bottle she had left behind on the bathroom counter. Her favorite mug sitting in the sink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. The thought of them together, of her giving him parts of herself that were supposed to be mine, was unbearable. I wanted to shut it all out, but the memories wouldn't stop. Worse, I started questioning the moments I thought were happy. Were they real? Or had she been pretending all along? The day we celebrated our 15th anniversary came to mind. We had taken a trip to the mountains with the kids, laughing and taking photos. But now, I wondered if she had been texting him while we were there, sneaking moments to connect with him even as she smiled at me. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the physical aspect, it was the lies, the secrecy, the emotional distance I hadn't even noticed. It was the way she had looked me in the eyes, time and time again, and told me she loved me while living another life behind my back. I didn't know how to process it all. There were moments when anger boiled over, and I found myself slamming doors or gripping the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. Other times, the sadness was overwhelming, and I had to step into the bathroom and close the door so my daughters wouldn't see me breaking down. I thought about her words, her claim that she wanted to come back, to fix things. But how could I ever trust her again? How could I ever believe anything she said? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of our family. She had broken something that couldn't easily be repaired. And while part of me still loved her, another part of me wasn't sure I would ever forgive her. I went to bed each night feeling the weight of her absence, and I woke up each morning to the reality of what she had done. Life felt like it was moving in slow motion, and every step forward was a struggle. Betrayal isn't just a wound, it's a scar. And I knew I would carry this one for the rest of my life. It was only a few days before she tried to worm her way back into my life. I got a message from her, brief and full of shallow sentiment. She said she wanted to come home, that she wanted to make things right. The words felt hollow. How could she make anything right when she had destroyed the foundation of everything we built together? She claimed she was sorry, but the tone was off. Her apology wasn't for what she did, it was for how I felt about it. She asked me to think about the family, as if she hadn't ripped it apart herself. There was no recognition of the damage she had caused, no real accountability. Her words were carefully chosen, as though she was trying to manipulate me into forgetting the depth of her betrayal. I asked her to tell me everything. I wanted the whole truth, not the sanitized version she thought I could handle. She refused at first, brushing it off with vague statements about mistakes and bad decisions. But I pressed harder, and bit by bit, the truth began to unravel. She admitted that their affair wasn't just an impulsive mistake, it had been deliberate. It started small, with shared lunches and inside jokes at work. Then it escalated, stolen moments, secret meetings, and eventually full-blown betrayal. The man had been married too, and they both lied to their families for years to keep the affair hidden. What stung the most was how calculated it all was. She had created an entirely separate life, one that I didn't know existed. While I was working late or helping the kids with their school projects, she was with him. While I was planning family vacations, she was sneaking away to be with her lover. Even worse, she admitted that she had lied to me about other things. There were weekends when she claimed to be visiting her sister but was actually staying in hotels with him. There were times she said she was working late, but she was really at his apartment. Every word she spoke seemed to uncover another layer of deceit. Her excuses infuriated me. She said she felt trapped in her life, that she was bored and needed excitement. I couldn't comprehend how she could use those feelings to justify tearing apart our marriage. Wasn't life supposed to be a partnership? If she felt that way, why didn't she come to me? Why didn't she tell me what she was struggling with? The more she talked, the more disgusted I became. She wasn't just a cheater, she was a liar, a manipulator, someone who had made conscious choices to hurt me and our family. And now, when her lover was gone and she had no one else, she wanted to crawl back and act like nothing had happened. I started to realize that her version of truth was selective. She only told me what she thought I could handle, leaving out the parts that might make her look worse. Her story kept changing, little details being added or altered with every conversation. I began to wonder how much of it was even real. She insisted that the affair was over, but I didn't believe her. How could I, when every word she said felt like another lie? I questioned whether she would have ever stopped if her lover hadn't died. Would she have continued living her double life, stringing me along while betraying me behind my back? Her lack of remorse was the final straw. She didn't seem sorry for what she had done, only sorry that she got caught. Her apologies were empty, her attempts at reconciliation half-hearted. She wanted to sweep everything under the rug and move on as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't move on. I couldn't ignore the years of lies, the betrayal, the way she had shattered my trust. Every time I looked at her, I saw the person who had destroyed the life we had built together. By the end of our conversation, it was clear that nothing she said could fix what she had broken. I told her I needed time to think, but the truth was, I already knew the answer. This wasn't just about her infidelity, it was about who she had become. A woman who could lie so easily, who could manipulate and deceive without hesitation, wasn't someone I could trust again. She left the house again, but this time, it didn't feel like an absence. It felt like a relief. I was beginning to see her for who she really was, and the truth was more painful than I ever imagined. But it was also freeing. For the first time, I started to accept that our marriage was over, and that it wasn't my fault. After she left again, the house felt both quieter and louder at the same time. Quieter because her physical presence was gone, and louder because the weight of her absence brought an intensity to everything else. The girls had questions, ones I couldn't answer yet. They knew something was wrong. Emily's sudden departure wasn't something I could explain away with another vague excuse. I tried to keep things normal for them. I made breakfast every morning, asked about their school days, helped them with homework. But the routine felt hollow. Every chore, every task, reminded me that I was now doing it alone. Emily used to help with these things, or at least she pretended to. Now, even her pretense was gone. The hardest part was watching my daughters struggle with the unspoken tension. They were smart, all three of them, and they picked up on more than I wanted them to. My oldest, at 15, had started retreating to her room more often. My middle daughter had become unusually quiet, her bright energy dimmed. And my youngest, still only 11, clung to me in a way she hadn't since she was a toddler. They asked about their mother every day. When's Mom coming back? Is Mom okay? I wanted to tell them the truth, but I wasn't sure how. How do you explain to children that their mother chose someone else over their family? That she wasn't the person they thought she was? I caught myself staring at photos of us as a family, trying to figure out when things had started to fall apart. The smiles in those pictures looked so genuine, so real. I had been fooled, but what about the girls? Did they notice the cracks I had missed? Emily had reached out to them a few times, but her calls were awkward, almost robotic. She promised she'd see them soon, but her tone lacked warmth, and the girls could tell. After one particularly stilted phone call, my middle daughter came to me and asked, "Is Mom mad at us?" That question broke something inside me. I reassured her the best I could, telling her that her mom loved her and was just going through a hard time. But I hated that Emily had put me in the position of having to smooth over her absence. It wasn't fair to the girls, or to me. Balancing their needs with my own emotions felt impossible. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break down, but I couldn't. They needed stability, and I was the only one left to give it to them. So I buried my anger and sadness as best I could, focusing on being the parent they deserved. Still, there were cracks in my facade. Some nights, after the girls went to bed, I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at nothing, trying to make sense of it all. I'd think about the life I had imagined for us, the family vacations, the graduations, the weddings, and wonder how much of it would still be possible. Emily had started reaching out to me as well, sending messages filled with half-hearted apologies and vague promises. She said she wanted to see the girls, but I hesitated. Was it selfish to protect them from her right now? Or was I delaying the inevitable? One evening, I finally let her visit. The girls were excited to see her, their faces lighting up when she walked through the door. But their excitement faded as the visit went on. Emily was distant, distracted. She asked them questions, but her attention seemed elsewhere, like she was fulfilling an obligation rather than truly connecting with them. After she left, the house felt even emptier than before. My oldest pulled me aside and said, "Something's wrong with Mom." I didn't know how to respond. She wasn't wrong, but how could I explain that their mother was still choosing herself over her family? Despite everything, I started to find strength in the routine. Every morning I woke up with a sense of purpose, to be there for my daughters, to shield them from the worst of this. They became my anchor, the reason I kept going. Parenting alone wasn't easy, but it gave me clarity. I saw Emily for who she really was now, not just a wife who betrayed me, but a mother who had failed her children. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for that. In the quiet moments, I started thinking about the future. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the one I had now. And as hard as it was, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my daughters and give them the stability they needed, even if that meant doing it on my own. The days began to feel a little less chaotic as I settled into the routine of being a single parent. It wasn't easy, but there was a strange comfort in knowing what to expect. The mornings were filled with rushed breakfasts and school drop-offs, afternoons with helping the girls with homework, and evenings with quiet dinners. The rhythm of it kept me grounded, even when the weight of Emily's betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind. Support started trickling in from places I hadn't expected. My parents, who lived a few hours away, called more frequently, offering advice and encouragement. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out when they heard about the situation. Most of them didn't know the details, just that Emily had left, and I was trying to hold things together for the girls. I found myself leaning on those conversations, even if I didn't share everything. Just hearing someone else's voice, someone who cared, made the silence of the house feel less oppressive. But Emily's presence still loomed, even from a distance. She was unpredictable, swinging between apologies and accusations in her messages. One day she would claim she wanted to come back and fix things, insisting that we could rebuild the life we had. The next, she would blame me for her choices, accusing me of neglecting her needs and pushing her into the arms of another man. At first, her words cut deep. I replayed every fight, every quiet moment between us, wondering if there was some truth in what she said. Had I missed something? Had I failed her in ways I didn't realize? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that her attempts to shift blame were just another manipulation. She wanted to avoid taking responsibility for her actions, and I wasn't going to let her. I started focusing on what I could control: my daughters, my home, my own healing. I began making small changes to the house, things I'd been putting off for years. I repainted the living room, rearranged the furniture, even started a small vegetable garden in the backyard. The girls helped, and it became a project that brought us closer together. There was something therapeutic about working with my hands, about creating something new out of the old. It was a reminder that I could rebuild, even if it wasn't the life I had imagined. Emily's visits with the girls remained strained. She came by every couple of weeks, always looking polished and put together, but her behavior was erratic. Sometimes she was overly affectionate, smothering the girls with hugs and promises she couldn't keep. Other times, she was distant, barely engaging with them at all. The girls started to notice. My youngest would ask why Mommy didn't stay longer, why she didn't seem as excited to see them as they were to see her. My middle daughter began pulling away, spending more time in her room after Emily's visits. And my oldest, always the most perceptive, started asking hard questions about why Emily had left in the first place. I struggled with how much to tell them. They deserved the truth, but I wanted to protect them from the full extent of Emily's betrayal. For now, I kept it simple, explaining that their mom was working through some things and needed space. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Despite the challenges, I felt moments of strength I hadn't known I was capable of. There were nights when I'd sit at the kitchen table, reviewing bills or planning meals, and realize that I was doing it. I was holding things together, not perfectly, but enough. I started to see glimpses of a future without Emily. At first, the idea terrified me. 17 years of marriage isn't something you just walk away from. But as the days passed, the thought of starting over began to feel less daunting. What scared me more than letting her go was the idea of taking her back. The thought of trying to rebuild a marriage with someone who had lied to me for years, who had betrayed not just me but our family, seemed impossible. Her attempts to reconcile felt hollow, as if she wanted to return to the safety of our life together without truly addressing the damage she had done. I knew I wasn't ready to make any final decisions yet, but deep down, I felt the shift. My focus was no longer on what Emily wanted, but on what I needed. For the first time in a long time, I started to believe that I deserved better. The anger and sadness were still there, but they no longer consumed me. Slowly, they were being replaced by a quiet determination. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew I was moving forward, and that was enough for now. Just when I thought I was beginning to piece my life back together, another storm rolled in. It started with an offhand comment from my oldest daughter. She mentioned something Emily had told her during one of their visits, something about an old friend helping her through a tough time. The words rattled in my head all evening. Emily had already admitted to the affair with her coworker, but this sounded different. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it didn't matter anymore. But the unease gnawed at me. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, I gave in to my curiosity and started piecing together timelines and stories she had told me over the years. It didn't take long for the truth to emerge. There had been another man. A brief fling, she later admitted, tucked into the same period as her long-term affair. She had met him during one of her so-called business trips. It wasn't serious, she claimed, just a fleeting connection. But the betrayal felt just as heavy. This revelation sent me spiraling back into the pain and anger I thought I'd started to control. How could one person hold so much dishonesty? How many layers of deceit were there? I began to wonder if I would ever know the full story. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, she revealed another crack in the foundation of our life together. I decided I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I confided in my closest friend, someone who had known both Emily and me for years. He listened patiently as I vented, offering words of support but no easy answers. It felt good to let some of the weight out, even if it didn't solve anything. The next time Emily came to visit the girls, the tension between us was palpable. I watched her closely, searching for signs of guilt or remorse, but she seemed composed, almost indifferent. It was as if she didn't grasp the gravity of what she had done, or didn't care to. Her visit that day ended in disaster. My youngest daughter had overheard part of a heated conversation between us, one I hadn't meant for any of the girls to hear. She came downstairs crying, asking why Mommy had lied so much. Emily froze, her polished facade cracking for the first time. She stammered something about mistakes and forgiveness, but my daughter wasn't having it. She turned to me, her tear-streaked face full of confusion, and asked if it was true. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The fallout was immediate. My middle daughter refused to come out of her room for hours, while my oldest stood silently in the corner, her face unreadable. Emily tried to console them, but her efforts felt hollow. They didn't trust her anymore, and neither did I. That night, after Emily left, I sat with my daughters and tried to answer their questions as honestly as I could without overwhelming them. I told them that their mother had made mistakes, that she was trying to make things right, but that it would take time. It wasn't enough. I could see the hurt in their eyes, the way their view of their mother had shifted. They didn't say much, but their silence spoke volumes. For the first time, I began to see the true scope of Emily's betrayal, not just to me, but to our entire family. She had taken something beautiful and pure, the love of her children, and fractured it. As painful as it was to watch, it also strengthened my resolve. I couldn't let her manipulations pull me back in. I had to stay strong for the girls, to give them the stability and love they needed. The following week, I met with a lawyer to start discussing the divorce process. It was a sobering moment, but also a necessary one. I couldn't keep living in limbo, waiting for Emily to decide what she wanted. It was time for me to take control of my life again. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more lies waiting to be uncovered. The thought haunted me, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. I had no choice. For myself and for my daughters, I had to keep going. Filing for divorce was a decision I had been inching toward for weeks, but when I finally handed the papers to my lawyer, it felt like stepping off a cliff. The weight of it was immense. 17 years of marriage boiled down to a cold, official document. It wasn't just an end to a relationship. It was an admission that what I thought was unbreakable had been destroyed. When Emily found out, her reaction wasn't what I expected. I thought she might cry, beg, or try to reason with me, but instead, she lashed out. She called me spiteful, accusing me of giving up on our family too easily. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she had made mistakes but that I was being cold and unyielding. Her words didn't cut me the way they might have before. Instead, they hardened my resolve. She had spent years making selfish choices, tearing apart the life we had built, and now she wanted to put the blame on me for finally saying, enough. I wasn't falling for it anymore. Emily's desperation became more apparent in the weeks that followed. She started showing up at the house unannounced, claiming she just wanted to see the girls. I didn't stop her for their sake, but her presence felt invasive. Every time she walked through the door, it was like a storm cloud rolled in, stirring up tension and unease. She tried to paint me as the unreasonable one, even in front of the girls. She'd make comments about how I was shutting her out or not willing to try, as if I was the one who had broken our marriage. I ignored her jabs, refusing to be drawn into an argument. But it was clear the girls noticed. My oldest daughter started avoiding her visits altogether. She would stay at a friend's house or lock herself in her room when Emily came over. My middle daughter stopped speaking during the visits, sitting quietly at the table with her eyes downcast. Only my youngest still clung to the idea that her mom could come back and make things right. It broke my heart to see the rift forming between Emily and the girls, but I couldn't shield her from the consequences of her actions. She had chosen this path, and now she had to walk it. The breaking point came during one of her visits. She had been unusually quiet that day, and I could tell something was brewing beneath the surface. After the girls went to bed, she asked to talk. Reluctantly, I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. She tried once again to convince me to stop the divorce, saying that we owed it to the girls to try. Her words were laced with desperation, but they rang hollow. I told her as calmly as I could that trust was the foundation of any relationship, and she had shattered it beyond repair. That's when the mask fell. She accused me of being cold and heartless, of wanting to punish her instead of fixing things. Her voice grew louder, angrier, as she hurled every excuse and justification she could think of at me. But I didn't react. I didn't yell or argue. I just stood there, letting her words wash over me like waves against a stone. And when she finally ran out of steam, I told her the truth. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about moving forward, about creating a life for myself and my daughters that wasn't built on lies and betrayal. I told her that I didn't hate her, but I couldn't love her anymore, not after everything she had done. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at me, her face a mixture of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite place. Resignation, maybe. And then she left. That was the last time she came to the house uninvited. After that night, things began to shift. The girls still struggled with the changes, but there was a sense of stability returning to our home. Without Emily's unpredictable visits, the tension started to fade. We found a new rhythm, one that felt more honest and real. Emily still tried to reach out, but her messages became less frequent as time went on. It was clear that she was starting to accept that there was no going back. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to rebuild. And that, I realized, was the first step toward healing. The finality of the divorce brought with it a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, and even guilt swirled together in a way that was hard to untangle. But beneath it all was a quiet determination. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see a path forward. Not the life I had planned, but one I could rebuild on my own terms. Life with the girls became my priority. The weight of what they had gone through was still evident in their eyes, but I could see them starting to adjust. My oldest daughter, who had withdrawn so much, began to open up to me. We'd have late-night talks in the kitchen, where she'd ask me questions about the divorce and about life in general. I didn't always have the answers, but I gave her what honesty I could, letting her know it was okay to feel hurt and confused. My middle daughter found solace in her art. I would come home from work to find her sketching in the living room, her drawings becoming more detailed and expressive as the weeks went on. She wasn't ready to talk about her feelings yet, but I could see her working through them in her own way. My youngest, still clinging to her innocence, brought light to the house. She'd leave notes on my desk or in my jacket pocket, Little reminders that she loved me, that I was doing okay as a dad. Her resilience gave me strength on the days when I felt like I was failing. The house itself began to feel different, too. I replaced the family photos on the walls with ones of just the girls and me, not to erase the past, but to remind us of the present. The vegetable garden we had started together began to flourish, and the sight of fresh tomatoes and peppers in the backyard felt like a small victory. Emily's presence in our lives became less frequent. She saw the girls on scheduled weekends, and though they didn't always come back happy, the visits grew less chaotic. I stopped asking them questions about their time with her, letting them share only what they wanted. It was hard not to dwell on what those weekends must have been like, but I learned to focus on the time I had with them instead. I started to reconnect with old friends, people I hadn't realized I had drifted away from during the marriage. They offered support and understanding, but also something I hadn't expected: laughter. For the first time in months, I found myself laughing without it feeling forced, the sound of it surprising even me. Work became an anchor as well. The routine, the structure, gave me a sense of control. I began to see myself in a different light, not just as a man recovering from betrayal, but as someone who was capable of building a new life. There were still moments when the pain crept in. Nights when the house felt too quiet, when I would lie awake thinking about what could have been. I would catch myself wondering if I had done enough, if I could have saved the marriage somehow. But those thoughts became less frequent as time went on. What surprised me most was the realization that I didn't miss Emily anymore. I missed the version of her I thought I knew, the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But the person she had become was a stranger, someone I could no longer trust. Letting go of her felt less like a loss and more like a step toward freedom. The girls and I started new traditions. Friday nights became movie nights, complete with homemade popcorn and sleeping bags in the living room. Sundays were for hiking or trips to the park, where we'd spend hours just talking and laughing. These small rituals became the foundation of our new life, a reminder that we were still a family, even if it looked different now. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. The man I was before the betrayal would never have believed he could handle this. But here I was, standing stronger than I ever thought possible. There were scars, of course. Betrayal leaves marks that don't fade easily. But those scars didn't define me. They were reminders of what I had endured, of the resilience I had found in myself. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Not just for myself, but for my daughters. They deserved a father who could show them that even in the face of heartbreak, life could go on. We were moving forward together, one step at a time. And that, I realized, was all that mattered.